Hi, and welcome to the Mystic Dog Mama podcast, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. This is the first in the summer series solo episodes where I want to jump on and talk to you about some topics that you guys have been reaching out saying that you have questions about or you want me to cover in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to be doing that over the next few weeks. And if you have a particular topic that you'd like me to address, please send me a message on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama and let me know, and I'll add it to the list. So the reason I wanted to get on today is I want to address how to best communicate with your own animals. And the reason I want to do this is that I just got off of recording an interview with Maureen Scanlon for her I Never Knew, But My Dog Did podcast, which is an awesome podcast. Maureen is just an absolute gem. She is actually a medium, a life coach, a relationship coach. She's an author. She's just incredible. And she's totally a mystic dog mama. So I'm going to be bringing her onto the podcast, but I just recorded a session for her podcast where she asked me to come on and talk about animal communication and actually do a session where I communicated with her dog, Callie. So I will be leaving some links in my socials about when that episode actually comes out. So you can go and hear that and check out Maureen's podcast. But it made me think that that is actually something, since some of you have been reaching out and saying that you were curious about animal communication, that I'll do a short little episode for you on that. And what I specifically wanted to address today is what I see are the biggest blocks and how to overcome them when it comes to communicating with your pet. So, the first one that I would like to bring attention to is dismissing the hits that you're already getting. I think, especially when we're trying to connect with our own animal, it's really easy to say, like, oh, I made that up, or that wasn't true, or that wasn't really anything. I just sort of, well, of course they would like that. Of course they wanted a treat. They always want a treat. So we often are dismissing the communications, the hits that we're already getting. So that's the first block. The second block that I wanted to bring up is actually not following through on the hits that you're getting. So you might get a sense of like, oh yeah, the dog wants a treat or needs some water or whatever, but then you think like, oh, I've just kind of made that up, and so you don't do anything about it. So that's the second thing, is not actually following through. The third thing that I think is a real block to being able to communicate with animals generally is being afraid of being wrong. I think that's actually a huge one, is that we get hits and then we're afraid to say anything about it because we think, nah, I made it up. We've dismissed it, right? We've not followed through. And we think like if I say something and it's wrong, then I'm going to be judged. So I think that those are kind of the biggest things that can become stumbling blocks. And if we address those, it makes communicating with animals that much easier. But I want to take a bit of a step back away from specifically animal communication, because I think so much of this points to our relationship with our intuition generally. And that the more that we cultivate our relationship with our intuition, which is cultivating the relationship that we have with, if you want to think of it like as your higher self, the part of you that is connected to everything, you might want to think about it as like source energy or the universe. Use whatever language resonates for you, whatever kind of feels right for you for this, but know that I'm talking about that part of ourselves that does know everything, that is connected when I'm referring to our intuition. We might experience it as like a little gut feeling. We might hear it as a voice. We might have it as a knowing. This refers to what I've talked about before as our clair senses, which are our extra sensory senses that are related to our physical senses. So you've probably heard of clairvoyance, the ability to see. We think of that as psychic seeing, where people are getting visions. There's clairaudience, where you're hearing. There's even clairgoustiance, which is tasting. You can have it in through a sense of smell, through a feeling, through a knowing. There are all different ways, and we all have a combination of them, but you'll probably find that one or two of them is stronger for you. And so as you start to kind of become aware of how you're getting information, just make a note of that and recognize, like, am I actually seeing stuff? Am I hearing stuff? Am I feeling it? Do I just have a knowing about something, but I don't know how I would know that? Just make a note of it. And something I wanted to say about clairaudience, and this is my experience with it, is I always thought that it would come in the form of hearing like another's voice, that it would sound different to me than my own voice. For me, so far, that hasn't been the case. For me, the voice that I hear is actually as though I'm just thinking in my head. It's my own voice. So I bring that up because sometimes we can dismiss, we are actually hearing things, but we think it's us thinking. And so we dismiss it. So I just wanted to add that out there in case you have that kind of experience, that very well might be that you're hearing something and so making a note of it. So I wanted to share some exercises that I have found personally helpful with developing intuition and psychic skills. And this, I'm going to draw on a couple of them that actually come from a book by Matt Auryn that's called Psychic Witch. And I'll leave a link to that in the show notes so you can check that out. But whether or not you identify with witchcraft or the idea of the title of witch, this book is so helpful because it has so many different exercises. The book is just chock full of exercises designed to help you develop your psychic abilities. And again, using all of those senses, all of those clairs. And so I found it really useful to use his exercises to develop them in different ways. And in particular, I want to talk about two. One of them is actually an aura exercise. So it's designed to help you see other people's auras, which is their energy field. And some people see that in terms of colors. You might see it in terms of like a different quality of light, like a mist kind of thing. There's no one right way to see any of this stuff. But he was explaining that this exercise can be really helpful for starting to open us up to being able to see that kind of stuff, which again is helping us to connect to our intuition. So it's actually a kind of fake it till you make it exercise. And it will sound kind of crazy, but trust me, I have found it so helpful. Not specifically, I've not used it to specifically see auras, although it's helped me with that, but more again about developing my intuition kind of more broadly. And it's based off of this idea, really, that we're taught like, oh, I'll believe it when I see it. But really, the inverse is true. I'll see it when I actually believe it. I'll see it when I believe that I can see it. I'll feel it when I believe I can feel it, right? So it's a permission giving exercise. And what he has you do is just go out on your normal everyday and just say to yourself in your head, you notice a person and you say, that person has an orange aura. That person has a yellow aura. That person has a red aura. And it doesn't matter if you can't see anything or whether or not it's true. It's actually at that point not about seeing the thing. It's about starting this inner dialogue where you are telling yourself that you are able to see it. And again, once you feel like you actually are able to, then you do start seeing it. So that's just a fun little exercise that you can be doing on your walks, like sitting on the bus, doing whatever, like in your everyday life. Just affirm to yourself that you can see it. And yeah, it is playful. It is using your imagination. But that's what so much of this is actually engaging our imagination, our ability to create these images, our ability to see differently, that will help to build your connection with your own intuition. So that's the first exercise from his book. The second exercise is actually about building focus, because when we do things like animal communication, we get into a bit of a meditative state. And I'm the first person to say that I actually struggle with being in a meditative state. I'm not somebody that can get into it really easily. I'm not somebody that meditates for an hour a day. I struggle with it. So I've reframed what meditation looks and feels like for me. And for me, it's about getting into more of a relaxed, quiet state where I'm just witnessing anything and everything that's going on in my internal landscape and in my physical landscape. So I can be meditating with my eyes open, for example. It doesn't have to be this, I need the perfect conditions, perfect quiet, and I'm just going to sit there on a pillow cross-legged for 30 minutes. There are times that I can do that, but full disclosure, not many. So I've reframed it for myself, and I found that that's been really helpful. But what is helpful when you're in a meditative state and you want to use it in order to connect a little bit more deeply is to be able to focus. And some simple exercises that I have found really useful for helping to build my ability to focus and to kind of lengthen the amount of time that I can be focused. And again, it's not about getting rid of the thoughts. I think that's often a misconception about meditation, but it's rather than I can see the thoughts, I'm experiencing that they're going by, but I'm not attaching to them and I'm not following them. So that's the big thing. But one of the exercises in Matt's book is about watching a candle flame. And this is actually quite a common tradition, a common exercise in a lot of different spiritual traditions, because it does focus the mind. It allows you to really pay attention to one thing and sort of zone out. And the idea is that you light a candle and you are just watching the tip of the flame. You're kind of putting all of your focus and your intention on watching that, and you just pay attention to it. And that's basically it. You just watch it. You're not making any, I mean, at first you might want to notice the judgments you're making about the whole process of like, for me, it was like, this is ridiculous. What is going on here? I've got all these other things to do, and just allow those things to kind of go. And they do go. But as you start to pay attention to the flame, you do start to get into a more relaxed state. And actually, as I'm just saying this to you, it made me think of something else that's been really helpful for me with focusing, which is if you bring your fingertips together like this. So if you're listening, I'm bringing both hands together, all of my fingers touching at the fingertips, and you just pay attention to that sensation of where they are joined up. Pay total attention to the feeling of your fingertips touching one another. It's really hard to start thinking about other things when you're putting all of your focus on that. So that might be something. It's also a bit of a somatic experience. So if you relate more to that, to kind of like a touchy-feely sort of experience, that might be more helpful than the candle gazing. But those are some options. Specifically about how to better connect with animals, this other tip that I'm going to give you might be more specific to that and more helpful. And that's actually try not connecting with your own animal at first, but connecting with another animal. Because we have inherent expectations of what we want to hear from our dogs, right? Like, and we're putting all that pressure on ourselves that we want to hear something. And oftentimes when we're connecting with our animal, it's because we might sense that something is wrong and we want to know what's going on. And so we have an expectation that's built into that, and we are attached to the outcome. So that very act of attaching can actually make it harder for us to connect. So as you're practicing, it can be more helpful if you start with a friend's animal, for example, or there are also groups on Facebook that you can join that are specifically about practicing animal communication. And people share photos of animals and they give feedback. So that might also be something that you would enjoy doing. Okay. So how do we then deal with all of this? How do you deal with not dismissing your thoughts or the hits that you're getting? And how do you deal with the not following through? Well, it actually comes down to like actually just trusting. I know it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but you just kind of, again, have to believe, like Auryn was saying, like, yeah, I can see that orange aura, believing that everything that you're experiencing is true. Even if it's not, tell yourself that it's true, because we're starting that dialogue. And this is where it's great to practice. Like there's no attachment to anything, right? We're just going to practice this whole experience. And so you tell yourself that everything that you're receiving is true so that you can open yourself up more and allow things to come in. To act upon that, you are just writing down or making note in whatever way feels comfortable for you of absolutely everything that you're getting. So if I'm hearing something, I write it down. If I'm seeing something in my mind's eye, I write it down. If I get a smell of something, I write it down. If I feel something in my physical body, like do I all of a sudden get a headache or an ache somewhere else, or like my foot hurts, that kind of a thing, I write every single thing down. And I'm not judging it. Again, I'm just receiving. I'm just a scribe. I'm just taking notes of what's coming through. And so I wanted to relay a short story to you about why that's helpful. And I've alluded to this. I think I've actually mentioned this specific thing in previous episodes, but just in case you haven't heard it, this is directly related to animal communication. When I did my very first workshop as a student for animal communication, it was set up in this way where we were given a photograph of an animal and we were in a group, and the parent of that animal we were going to be reading was also in the group. And we went through a short meditation to kind of get us relaxed and open. And then we had, I think it was like 2 or 3 minutes maximum to look at this photo and connect with this animal and then write anything and everything down that kind of came up for us. And then the idea was that we would each go around sharing what it is that we received. And at the very end, the pet parent would go back and they were taking notes. They would go through every person's reading and say like what they resonated with or explain it or whatever. And this was such a fantastic first experience for me for a number of reasons. The first reason that it was really great is that as I went into this meditative state and then I set the intention of connecting, the first thing that came to me was I heard in my own voice the word spaghetti. And I immediately thought, you have to be kidding me. I can't do this. Like, what relationship does spaghetti have to a dog? But I wrote it down. I made myself write it down. So I dismissed, it was more that I acknowledged that I had these doubts, but I pushed that aside and I followed through and I wrote it down anyway. And then I went through and gathered some other stuff. Then again, we went through and shared everything, and then we got some feedback. And when it came turn to my feedback, the dog's mom said to me that she couldn't believe that I said spaghetti, that that was so right on because she is preparing, or at that time, she was preparing to move closer to her parents. And she was telling her dog that they were getting prepared for this move and they were going to be closer to grandma and grandpa. And she has this issue with her dad that her dad always makes the dog spaghetti with butter and gives it to the dog as a treat. And she's furious. She keeps telling him, please stop doing it. But the dog obviously loves it. And so as she has been talking to the dog about, we're going to be moving closer to grandma and grandpa, the dog is really excited because she's going to get spaghetti. So that was an example of something that for me seemed totally out of place, but for her was totally resonant. And that actually confirmed for her that I had connected to her dog because that was so specific. So had I not said that, we wouldn't have made that connection. So again, it's an example of, even if you think it sounds nuts, just write it down. The other thing is that relates back to this idea of being afraid of being wrong. You're never actually wrong. Just because it doesn't make sense to the pet parent at that moment doesn't mean it won't make sense at another point. I've had this experience where I've relayed information to a pet parent and it's not resonated with them at the moment, but then they've gotten in touch with me weeks down the line and said, you're never going to believe this. And so you never know when it's actually going to hit, when it's going to be right. And it might entail that the person has to go back and talk to somebody else to find out more information to then, like within their family, for example, to then put the pieces together. So we have to be willing to recognize that our role is not to interpret it and it's not to be 100% accurate. Our job is only to transcribe what it is that we're receiving and relay that, and then allow the pet parent to make meaning of it themselves. So those are some things that I wanted to share with you. And I hope that that's kind of helpful. It's a quick little example of how you can start working with your own intuition to be able to develop that further so that you can work with your own dog. Like I said, it's often easier if you start with other animals. So if you've got some friends that you want to just try it out on, and it's helpful if you can then, if it's somebody that you know, that they can then give you some feedback, they can give you some validation. And it will help as you're starting to do that, that you're paying attention to how you are receiving messages, because you'll start to see, for example, that maybe you do tend to get things more visually, or maybe you are hearing things more, or maybe you're like me where you feel things more and you have a sense of a knowing. That will help build your confidence with it as you just keep practicing. So I hope that that's helpful. If you would like me to do another one of these sessions on another topic, let me know. Like I said, message me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. Also, I am opening up bookings for animal communication sessions. So if you would like to book a session with me to connect with your animal, let me know. Again, you can message me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. As well as if you would like me to put together a workshop on how to communicate with your dog or any other animal, let me know, because that's been coming up a bit and I'm kind of toying around with the idea of putting together a workshop where we would work live together on that, and I would create a supportive community for you to be able to practice with one another. So if that's of interest, also message me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. All right. Thank you again for joining me, and I'll see you on the next solo session. All right. Until next time.